Welcome to another TDM discussion.
All right, so this topic we want to talk about is about the tariffs, specifically the steel and aluminum tariffs that President Trump has talked about and I believe put into place, but I'm not more about the effects of them. So first, before we actually get into the tariffs themselves and what China and other countries want to respond with, I want to talk about or at least I want to show you essentially steel jobs in America. So this graphic that should be going up right now is a map of the United States and the steel jobs in America. This is from The Economist, and basically the inner circle says that the inner circle are jobs that are basically producing steel itself. So like a steel mill or something like that, where they're producing steel itself. Now the outer circle is jobs that are very steel heavy, steel intensive, they're related to steel, like producing things that contain steel or whatever it be. So as you can see, the Rust Belt was has a lot of steel jobs, and if you remember back to the 2016 campaign, you had President Trump, at the time candidate Trump. He was campaigning rather populist in terms of his economic policy, and specifically when it came to trade deals and tariffs. I don't particularly remember him specifically stating like he wanted to put in steel tariffs or aluminum tariffs or whatever. I don't remember him specifically saying that during the campaign. But he was very populist in terms of what he wanted to do with the economy. He kept saying that he wanted to bring back factory jobs and steel jobs and stuff. But I don't think he ever actually explicitly stated he wanted to do tariffs. But in today's day and age, we have these tariffs that the administration has been talking about.
I believe they have implemented the first round of them.
They have actually implemented them? All right. Well, so The Economist also says in the article that I'm citing this from, basically it would apply to about $46 billion of trade, which is about 2% of America's goods importation. That's a really weird phrase. I'm sorry if that was grammatically incorrect. But it would apply to about 2% of that. And it would basically make it President Trump's really biggest act of protectionism. This is kind of a return to protectionist policy to an extent. For a little bit of historical context, in the early 20th century, we were very isolationist. We were very protectionist when it came to our economy, and it really just came to America in general. That started turning around the World War era, and from there we started going away slightly away from protectionism, more towards globalization. And now we have President Trump. He's returning us back to a little bit of protectionism. This isn't a huge deal, the steel tariffs, as in the tariffs themselves, in terms of the effect of the economy it's going to have. It's not a huge deal, but the effects of it afterwards and what it's going to do with our politics in terms of the global stage is going to be a big deal, potentially. So basically, is what the steel tariff's going to do is I'm pretty sure it's basically only on China at this point. The article that I'm citing from was back in early March, and it was back when there were still talks about having it on Mexico and Canada and other countries. But as far as I remember from what I've heard, it's basically only on China now. It's between the United States and China. And so really what this is going to do is probably going to ignite a trade war, and we've already started seeing the effects of that. We have the United States, who started out the trade, or started with the steel tariff, the steel and aluminum tariffs. But then you have China, who retaliates, and they announce that they're going to put it's a small amount of money, relatively, and it just feels like they're just going like, all right, I know you're probably not serious about this, so we're just going to kind of put some of these small tariffs on you, and we're going to try and see if you back down. Is kind of the feel I get from this, because they're announcing import duties, which tariffs, on $14 billion worth of soybeans from the United States. And for context of that, China remains the second largest market for American agricultural exports. So basically, America exports a lot of food, a lot of agricultural products, and China is the second biggest market for that. So as a result, China's putting a tariff on soybeans. I'm not sure how big our soybean market is in terms of how many soybeans we produce each year. All right, so America produces a lot of agriculture. That's one of our biggest exports. And for context about the soybean tariff that China has been talking about, so America produces 547 million bushels of soybeans. Now, that doesn't mean, I want to be clear about this, that doesn't mean that we export 547 million bushels. That just means we produce that much. However, a number of that is export. That was produced in 2014. But for context, for how much that is, corn is easily one of our biggest one of our biggest crops that we produce. So in 2012, we produced 1.88 billion bushels of corn. So that's almost 4 times as much corn than soybeans. So soybeans isn't really this giant or this huge monolith of a crop that we produce. I'd say probably maybe like a middle of the line one that would do some kind of minor harm to the economy, as kind of like a all right, you need to stop with this because you're kind of shaking the boat here. But at the same time, it's also not going to just completely destroy the U.S. economy. You have anything you want to say?
Well, of course. When it comes to the subject of protectionism, we have historical moments to go back on to kind of give us some reference on how protectionism ends up playing out. And so I'll start with the more modern one. Start with George Bush Jr. And he implemented steel and I believe aluminum, but I know for a fact steel tariffs at a slightly lower rate, I believe, not 25% like Trump is proposing or has implemented, but I think it was like 8 to 25, so depending on what country it came from. And it was on more countries than China, so this case doesn't perfectly correlate, but it was on like Canada, Mexico, China, and a couple others. And we had a net loss of a couple 100,000 jobs and a decrease in trade from that act of protectionism. And before George Bush had even left office, George Bush had removed the tariffs because, and I'll go back on our the second case I want to point to, a little older, Hawley Smoot. Protectionism has a historical like reputation of not really working in the end as it is wished by the people who implement it. So if we go back to Hawley Smoot is actually what set us on this course to this current tariffs being implemented. Back in the 1930s, Congress was the body by which we implemented tariffs. And we are hitting near the Great Depression. It hadn't quite happened just yet. This was late 20s, actually. And some American farmers were feeling like they were being pushed out of business because of some moves towards free trade. Prices were just cheaper from other countries. And so they wanted a bit of protection. So Hawley and Smoot particularly represented the interests of the cotton lobby. And Cotton wanted a tariff on cotton, obviously, so that American cotton would be preferable in the American market. During that time, though, they bring the bill to Congress, and before they can even get one person to agree to vote on it, the first person that comes up to them, just like any good congressman or woman, is there to represent their constituents. And whatever state that individual is from represented lobbyists for the corn lobby, and they wanted tariffs on corn. And this cycle continued on and on and on until Hawley-Smoot was finally passed with tariffs on over 20,000 individual products. Amongst those were eggs, a couple different livestock, and I believe some metals as well. It was learned pretty quickly that this was not the right thing. Unfortunately, we don't have this in a vacuum, of course. So the Great Depression happened after this law passed, eventually. So this wasn't the cause of the Great Depression. But as far as we could tell, statistically speaking, Hawley and Smoot led to a wave of protectionism around the world. Many countries brought up tariffs against the United States in retaliation of the 20,000 plus tariffs. And global trade fell something like 2/3 compared to where it was before. Of course, we didn't have that level of failure with the George Bush tariffs, but after Hawley-Smoot, Congress basically agreed that it was not reasonable for Congress to be in charge of tariffs. They gave the job of imposing tariffs and putting it into law to the president, and that's why we now have presidents that pass tariffs. Because the theory is that since the president has a longer election cycle, 4 years, and the president isn't directly tied to one constituency. He doesn't have to only worry about the cotton farmers or the corn farmers. He has to worry about America as a whole, so the belief is that the president won't be bullied into one tariff turning into a couple hundred or a couple thousand. But I think it also leaves the issue that we can have this moving back and forth between policies very rapidly. So I think it is basically without a doubt that at least in the way the current world works, a free trade is the optimal route. It's not perfect, but it is the route by which we can produce more and do better as a whole. And protectionism leads to nothing but this idea that nationalism, in my opinion, it's very subtle nationalism.
I mean, yeah. I won't lie. Up until, I don't know, maybe 4-5 months ago, I used to be pretty serious when it came to protectionism. I used to be pretty protectionist. And now, I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm a Alex Jones globalist or anything. But I mean, I'm just like there's a middle ground there, not to sound too centristy, but there is a legitimate middle ground between just flat out zero tariffs on anything, let corporations run amok, and just making sure that there's no such thing as import-exports.
There definitely is a middle ground to be found because, like I just levied against protectionism, the dangers of protectionism to an extent, there are dangers to free trade and globalism. I think globalism has led to a decrease as a whole of workers' rights because they choose to go to countries in which they can work in, that they can pay people unlivable wages and they can make them work 80 hours a week with no consequences from the law. And these are Western countries that supposedly in the West we hold these ideals of someone should be able to work 40 hours a week and be able to afford a living to a degree. We aren't perfect with them, but we hold these ideals. But then these Westerners form corporations and essentially continue on a new cycle of imperialism.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so like I'm somewhat in favor of free trade, and progressives will lambaste me for that, but whatever. Because at the end of the day, there's not really a really good way of going back. There's just not in today's economy, and definitely not in the future. Because at the end of the day, we're going to have some degree of free trade. We're not going to have these just little closed economies where no one is allowed to import or export, and protectionism is just the end all be all. Because then, I mean, what's going to happen? You're going to have, quite frankly, you're going to have like a country like America, a country like Germany, a country like China. They're going to be these giant economic powerhouses, but then you're going to have countries, say, like, I don't know, like Malaysia, or a country like Uganda or Rwanda, or even a country like I don't know, maybe like Argentina. I don't know, some random country that maybe doesn't have the same resources that countries like the U.S., Germany, and China have. There's whole markets there, and corporations are going to want to go there, no matter what. And if they can, they're going to move there, and they're probably going to exploit workers. That's why, I mean, that's one horrible part of free trade. And that's why I'm in favor of it's free trade, but I'm in favor of regulating it in some sense. Like for example, like TPP. Back when TPP was going to be a thing, almost, you had a provision in TPP that would basically make it that corporations are above the law. Basically, corporations did not have to abide by international courts, and they would basically be above a nation's sovereignty. So if Venezuela, for example, wanted to sue ExxonMobil, for example, they couldn't do that. ExxonMobil would be able to say, nope, you're not allowed to do that because I am a corporation and I'm above the law, is basically what a provision said. And yeah, I mean, that's a horrible side effect of some parts of free trade. But at the end of the day, you're not going to see me going out in favor of TPP, because it's not just like a two-sided issue.
No, and the issue is definitely, I think, more complex than protectionism versus free trade. Because to some extent, I think it's obvious that a country can't focus with a primarily protectionist attitude. At least now. They just no longer can. But the problem is that the ideal of free trade and globalization was that we bring up quality of life for every individual on the planet. That we interconnect us as a whole, as a race. And
that's exactly what I was trying to get at when I was saying like the countries like Malaysia or Uganda, like these countries have objectively lower standards of living than countries like Germany, or countries like Canada, or countries like the U.S. And that's what I was trying to get at, is that the whole point of free trade and the whole point of globalization is to bring up those standards of living.
And the problem is, though, it has been hijacked by this new concept of, and we can have a longer discussion about this. I'll only briefly mention it, but it's been hijacked by this new concept that corporations are individuals, at least in the way that they're treated by the law, and in some ways they're better than individuals, and because of that, corporations have rights to an extent. And we have a long history of court cases that have demonstrated this, like Citizens United and further back as well. And it's really quite sad because we've agreed that a group of individuals working together in an organized manner are somehow on the equal level of the individuals that form that group. And I just simply don't believe in that. Taking a little more anarchistic look at the world, I believe that the tyranny comes from a top-down kind of leadership model, and that's why I think democracy and such tries to prevent but doesn't do a great job at doing. It's the idea that people on the bottom should have more power, more say, and so I think it's a little ridiculous to hold the government to certain standards because it's not an individual, it's an organization, but then to do the reverse with a corporation.
And the last aspect of this whole tariff deal I want to talk about is the trade war part. So if you don't really know what a trade war is, very simply, it's basically, so like, just for example, we'll use the countries that are involved with this tariff. So you have the United States and China. So say you have the United States enact a tariff. So in this case, the steel and aluminum tariff. You have them enact this tariff, but then you have China in response enact a soybean tariff that I mentioned earlier. And then after that, you have the United States enact another tariff, or some other kind of economic pressure, and then you have China in response do something else. And then it keeps going and going and going and going and going. And the whole idea is to try and strain the country economically. That's the whole idea. It's basically a war without gunshots. And one thing that I find really just incredible, that it has become basically commonplace within not 15 months, like 18 months or so since Trump has been elected, something like that. It's become almost completely commonplace that Trump doesn't care what his advisors say. And what do I mean by that? Well, you have Axios reporting that apparently there wasn't a single meeting where senior officials sat down to talk about the pros and cons of this tariff. Trump didn't even ask for the advice of his top economic advisor. Again, I'll say that again. His top economic advisor on an issue about international economics and trade. Like, I don't understand how you could possibly just not care about that, especially as the president.
But you have to understand, first and foremost, he's the smartest man to have ever been born. His IQ is so high. I'm sorry for all you sad losers.
Yeah, no. But yeah, so, like, I just don't understand how you could possibly just not even, like, talk to your advisors about this. And Trump insists, like there was this quote from him. He says, basically in response to reporters talking about the tariff, and how it's going to affect and hurt farmers because of the soybean tariff that China wants to put on them. Trump basically just says, we'll make it up to them. Like he admits that this whole fiasco is going to hurt farmers, but we're going to make it up to them. But he never actually says how. He never actually says how they're going to make it. Like, is there going to be a subsidy for farmers for soybeans? He doesn't say that. He never says it. At least not that I see. Not that I found. Is there going to be some kind of grant given to soybean farmers to make up for the losses? Again, a subsidy, but in a less direct sense, I guess. I don't know. He never says it. And this is like my big problem with the president, is that he never says anything. He says things, but he never says anything. never says anything like of value, never says anything of substance. And I feel for the farmers here, because they're just going to get screwed. Especially particularly soybean farmers. They're just going to get screwed out of this, because they're just going to lose money. And there's already an issue with farmers. I don't know about soybean farmers, but in general farmers, particularly like chicken farmers and stuff, they already get screwed. Because you have corporations like Tyson and Purdue and any other of those big corporations who just completely screw farmers out of anything. And I don't know if it's the same way with soybeans, but it feels like it's going to be if it isn't. But in this case, instead of the corporation screwing them over, it's going to be the government screwing them over. And that makes me sound like a giant conservative now. But I don't know. I think that's about it. All I have to say about this topic,
Well,
without getting super, I don't know, super hyped, I guess, or whatever.
well, the trade war does loom. We'll see in the future what consequences come of the tariffs that have already been implemented, or whether any more tariffs get implemented. And I think that covers it.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching another TDM discussion. Once again, if you like this content, please leave a like and subscribe, and, more importantly, comment and let us know what you think about this. We'll be sure to get back to you, and maybe we can have an interesting discussion. As well, as always, the link to our Discord group is down below. We have recently started up a new book club, and we are reading through at least a book a month. So if you wish to join in, see what books we are reading, and read along and discuss with us, we will be doing that. Check out the TDM website, the link is below as well. And as always, have a great day.